I'm here to share with you a couple of my little ideas of how to push flavor to the max without ever really pushing beyond what the spells can do or what is possible within D&D. Now, while I do believe what is possible within D&D is only limited to what's up here, the rules disagree with me. But as a D&D player, that's typically where most of the fun happens. So, a couple of the builds that I have in mind are Pokemon trainers. Those are notoriously hard to do, but that's a different topic entirely. Summoning is way overcomplicated and does not need to be as difficult as most D&D content creators make it out to be. Honestly, all you really need to do to play the greatest Pokemon trainer is just be a sorcerer with the right spells and the right meta magic. Honestly, that can make the greatest Pokemon trainer. Hell, I'll go into it right now. So, to make a Pokemon trainer out of a sorcerer, all you really need to do is reflavor. What I mean by that, let's go into it. So, let's take Ash, for example. His first partner Pokemon is a Pikachu. We all know that. So, how do we get Pikachu? Easy. Take Shocking Grasp. I'd recommend Lightning Lure. Chromatic Orb, that's a good one. Let's take some of those. Now, second we go to cast it, our verbal and somatic components, those are just going to be us. Be you grabbing the Pokeball and throwing it out, and your verbal components being like, Pikachu, use Thunderbolt, and then you kill him. You could also just straight up have Pikachu be on your shoulder and then Shocking Grasp, which be it attacking you, instead of it being like you grasp yourself and shock. It's a separate entity, sure, but it's more of an extension of your magic than it is an actual monster you summon. I feel like that's a great way of fixing sorcerers because it gives you all the flavor you want with with summoners, but it takes away the DM's bullshittery of having to deal with every single stat pool of every rat, lizard, and tyrant you have in those little balls in your pocket. Just like Pokemon trainers, as you get higher level, you can create bigger spells that can be higher level Pokemon, that can be higher level moves. Multi-turn moves don't really exist in Pokemon, but I'm sure if you work with your DM, you can find a way to really charge up Moonbeam to give you that Solar Beam feel. Continuing the idea of reflavoring things without changing how the spell works, I had a pretty bold thing I said during the YouTube short, which was I don't care if your fireball deal is a ball of ice or just a AoE of rot, right? That it shouldn't change the deal's fire damage. I even related that to the Sukuna versus Jogo fight. I'm going to go a little more in depth in that here. So, when it comes to what damage type you deal, I don't think that should necessarily lock you into what your spell should look like. Now, I feel like most DMs would like for your fire damage to be from a heat-based source, at least, but I don't feel like it really must be, because freezer burn, as I mentioned, it's a great joke if you wanted to do a cryomancer and then just dump all of it into fire spells. With the transmuted spell meta magic, you can change the spell so even if your DM doesn't like it, you can just snap your fingers and suddenly, boom, lightning damage. It can add in whole new realms of flavor that you have to work with. Now, with that being said, I do have to talk about the elephant in the room. That being, not everyone's DM is cool. If your DM is not fun to play with, does not allow you to do what you want, and does not allow you enough creative freedom, leave them. Find a new group. It may take you a while, but trust me, bad D&D is so much worse than no D&D, because I'm sure we've all had those stories where, you know, your first time playing D&D is pretty rough because you don't know what you're doing and maybe the party doesn't acclimate to that very well, and then they throw you in the deep end and you get nervous, so you don't talk at all. I hate hearing those stories because D&D is such a fun game that can be played with friends, and it is just sad to see how some people destroy this game with the structure, the rules, but it has to be to remain D&D when the whole point of it's just supposed to be a group of friends having fun. And honestly, so long as you're having fun, I don't think the rules matter at all. Like, sure, it may be against the rules for my wizard who's completely out of spell slots to be able to channel up that inner anime friendship to be able to cast one last hurrah spell, but it's sick as hell. It's so cool to be able to give them these little gems of these moments that they don't get to have that often. And when it comes to flavor, I think that just opens up these moments to be much more thematic, much more storytelling. Instead of it being structured to only something the DM can do, you now open the gates. You've allowed your party to be able to, to be Sukuna, to be able to rise to the top, and whenever they become strong enough, they can shoot that fire arrow at Jogo and burn through the volcano. They can overheat enemies that are typically immune to fire damage if that's their thing. I have always hated the fact that immunities existed in D&D and they aren't given vulnerabilities to counter it. I am a firm believer that if you are immune to a damage type, you should be vulnerable to another one. That is just something I am a firm believer in. For example, a Balor, terrifying, immune to fire, sure, but it should be vulnerable to radiant. Now, I am aware not all radiant is holy light, but it doesn't have to be holy damage in order to hurt a demon. I feel like it should be fairly accepted to think that some demons might have PTSD from, the front lines of fighting the abyss or fighting angels, where they see this light and it kind of knocks them off their guard for a minute, maybe allows it to deal more damage than it naturally would, even if it isn't holy light. And that's a whole other side tangent that I'm getting drug away with. But with D&D being what it is, I don't I don't think that something as simple as how my spell looks should do anything other than storytelling. And as that storytelling continues and your DM picks up on these little things like, oh, okay, so his Charmander that's on his shoulder spitting that firebolt, that's a physical creature. So next time I have a bunch of archers and he tries to shoot a firebolt, I can have one of my archers pop his Charmander. And that is a vulnerability given to the players now. Because if that animal goes down, obviously it's not going to stay dead. The DM should never make that stay dead. Well, never say never, but rarely should the DM ever make something stay dead if it's in this example. It's like in Pokemon. If your Charmander faints, you can't use any spells that you flavor for Charmander now. Obviously, you can. There's nothing in D&D stopping you from doing that, but thematically, you shouldn't be able to. But maybe that opens up the opportunity for one of your other Pokemon to gain the ability to cast Fire Punch, or maybe one of your other party members to be able to help you out. Maybe striking a match or throwing down some gasoline on something, you can then shock to create a fire spell. It can create new opportunities for creativity that most people never get anymore with D&D. And I think these little avenues of creativity, when they fully blossom, can just make any encounter just so infatuating and just something that you can't get away from, you know? Something memorable. That's the word I was looking for. I have a lot of ideas like this. I feel like out of the box thinking is something a lot of people miss in D&D, especially DMs. I for one personally, I miss so badly when players would would try to find out these little minute details instead of just being like, well, I know next to nothing in the monster manual resists lightning damage, so I'm gonna min-max the hell out of my lightning damage. I miss whenever they would be like, oh, I know, you go cleave off some of its scales to create a weak point under it, or go hack and slash into it, create an opening in its chest. That way, whenever my spell hits it, it's hitting a much deeper tissue that's not used to being touched, and that could cause some extra effects. Thinking of it as a much more reality-bound game outside the realm of reality, if that makes sense, is just so much more fun than just sitting there being like, 4, net 20. Like, that doesn't sound fun to anyone, right? I'm not alone here. Now, I'm aware that not everybody has the same level of creativity that I have, that you have, and people around you, if you have friends. But I feel like that isn't something that we should just be necessarily okay with. Like, it's completely fine if you don't want to flavor your stuff. You'd like for it to just be just a stream of fire, or just what the spell entails. That's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're missing out on a major point of D&D when you don't take that extra step and you don't add your own flair into it. Now, as you can tell by the title of my channel, I am a firm believer that flavor matters. That's in cooking, that's in D&D, that's in everything you do. Flair, flavor, everything you do, those little spices, that little pizzazz, all of it matters. But let me rein myself in here. But in D&D, I cannot stress this enough. You have to make sure the people around you are comfortable with what you're doing before you can do it. Feel free to just send this video to your dungeon master, and if he disagrees with me, well, tell him to leave a comment. I'll argue with him. Now, I've rambled on a lot in this video, so I'm going to kind of close off with just some highlighted points. Number one, flavor should never be something that is necessarily bad, but opening up vulnerabilities for your player can make for immaculate storytelling, and it can make for just beautiful storylines within it. For example, my Charmander earlier, say it gets pelted with an arrow and it no longer can produce that fire, it's fainted. In D&D terms, that thing is now bleeding out. And sure, if your DM is cool about it, you can retract it in your Pokeball, and after a long rest, it'll be healed. But in the off chance it doesn't, now you have a whole storyline where we have to get this thing healed before my lizard dies, or I can't cast another fire spell until I catch a new fire Pokemon. And then if it does die and you don't get your Charizard, then all of a sudden another storyline opens. You're like, okay, poor guy, but I gotta get something new. You know, all these spells I have are now useless. Now obviously you could change out the spells, but I'm talking thematically. You now have this opening where instead of a Charmander, then now you can go find Ponyta, or you can go, maybe this will be a opening for your big bad, or this could be an amazing opening for like Ho-Oh in the original Indigo League Pokemon series. Like how Ho-Oh appears, instead of it just being a rainbow trail across the sky, it could literally fly down and grace you by reviving your Charmander, giving you a Flareon. It could even produce Entei for you, if to kind of show that character has some importance to it. But I really and truly do believe that little aspects of flavor, when fully fleshed out and believed, can create the greatest things in D&D. It can create a beautiful story. It can create immaculate time together as friends. And I will close with my final point on summoners. Summoners in D&D are way overcomplicated. My Pokemon idea from earlier, for example, very simple, very to the point. If you'd like to summon your Pokemon to battle for you, there's nothing saying you can't do that. If you do choose to do that, then you are putting them in a much more dangerous position. And that can sometimes pay off. If you need your Charizard actually on the field, you can cast Draconic Spirit, and suddenly, boom, your Charizard's a real creature with real hit points. And suddenly it can actually take some actual beatings instead of just being a way for you to cast your spells. Now, before, I'm sure some people are going to say, but what if my Charizard's casting a spell for me and I want it to block it? Flavor it to be shield. Flavor it to be shield, flavor it to be mage armor. Just don't be a jerk about it. But on the hype of solo leveling and how he kind of, I haven't finished solo leveling yet, but with how solo leveling, from what I've seen, allows Sung Jin Woo to resurrect the people who he murders in a dungeon um, by saying arise. Whenever he does that, he has armies at his disposal. So how do you run armies in D&D without, clogging everything? Because everybody has that one guy in their group that wanted to play a necromancer with an army of undead. And this video is running a little long, and that's not really the topic of the video, so I will talk about that in another one. Probably make a short about it soon. There's so much more options when you flavor spells rather than go off of what D&D wants you to do. When you really break apart from D&D as a gaming system and think of it more as a guideline instead of a set of rules, I think the amount of fun you have in D&D will skyrocket.